This episode of the Event Industry News podcast is sponsored by Evolution Dome, award-winning temporary inflatable event structures. Take a look at their structures at evolutiondome.com.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. I may sound a little bit croaky on today's podcast. I'm suffering the after effects of an extensive an intense day on Saturday, helping out at a local music festival that takes place in the town centre where I live in Yorkshire. And it was a full sort of 15-hour day in sweltering conditions in a venue doing sound and getting bands on and off stage. And I think it's going to take me at least a week to get over that one day of work, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners will have some empathy for and some experience of themselves. So we move on, and hopefully, as always on the podcast, it's not going to be me that's doing all the chattering. It's our guest. Today we're going to be talking about event launches and relaunches and how the approach to those tasks has somewhat changed since the pandemic. Regular listeners will know that in those sort of first episodes back that I joined you on sort of post-ish pandemic, we spoke a lot about the downtime and the sort of almost luxurious position that for events people we were given in 2020 when there was some time off. I know fundamentally it wasn't a great period of time for us, but one real sort of major plus that came out of it was that time to almost reset, to breathe a little bit, to see how we were doing things and maybe reevaluate. And my guest today is very much going to be using that as a start point of today's chat on the podcast, to look at how we've emerged from there and how we look at almost this rebirth and how we've maybe changed some of our formulas since that period of time in 2020. I'm delighted to welcome for the first time to the podcast Caroline Cronin. Caroline is the head of events from emap, an organization that most of our listeners, if not all of them, will have come across at some point in their careers. Caroline, a very warm welcome to the podcast.
Hello, hi James, good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And as I said in the introduction, then that you could hear, we did have that period of time, didn't we, in 2020, where yes, it wasn't great. Yes, it had a huge impact on our industry. But we were given something that we've never had before, which was a bit of downtime in order to just reevaluate, reassess. And I think it would be fair to say most people that work in this industry will have allowed themselves a bit of time to maybe do things a little bit differently. Maybe we should get some context first of all on your own role at emap, and maybe sort of go post-pandemic and find out, what was your journey in events up until the pandemic?
Very good question. It depends how far you want me to go back, James. So in a nutshell, my events career kind of started out started out as a journo, actually.
Right.
Or wannabe journo, found that not for me, moved into event ops, then I moved into event production, which is kind of quite an unusual path, and then more into management roles. So up until the pandemic, I was working for a smaller publisher called Burlington Group. And then COVID hit and I was made redundant along with, everybody else in the event sector.
Absolutely.
So I had a lovely 4 months doing a lot of gardening. And then I went back to the PPA, which some of you listening might have heard of, the Professional Publishers Association, where I'd worked previously, and I took up a maternity cover role there as events and commercial director, which was fabulous. I absolutely loved it. And then this role here at emap came up, which at the time was called head of conferences. And I jumped at it, quite frankly. It was one of those things where, throughout my B2B publishing career, everybody that you interact with has worked at emap at some point. And I almost felt left out. So I thought, brilliant, now's my time. So now I am working in the fashion, architecture and building services group of emap. And I'm essentially responsible for the profitability of conferences and some of our awards, not all of them. That kind of in a nutshell is what I'm doing day to day, is kind of project managing and making sure we hit our profit targets. And absolutely. I'm also responsible for the content.
And I mean, content is, arguably the number one sort of fundamental to any event. But something that was interesting in the conversation, but people won't be surprised to hear that prior to the podcast, there are email threads and conversations going off before, we actually sort of meet to record them, to maybe discuss what we might look at. And something that you said is that a lot of the precedents and trends that we'd built up until that point have been thrown out the window to an extent. We came back and started with a blank canvas. What were sort of some of the things that does anything jump out at you that straight away when you came back with your live events, with the conferences, with the awards, that you thought that differently?
Well, you know what? I think for me, one of the most simplest things was the old adage of, don't do events on a Friday. It, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
wha- what does a day of the week mean anymore? It means absolutely nothing because of the way that people work now. So there are all these kind of, inherent event rules that everyone kind of understood and worked to because, as a whole, it made sense. But then, all of a sudden, okay, that's not a thing anymore. The timings of events, if you're structuring a conference, okay, well, do we need to start later and finish earlier now? More people are commuting in and out. Like, what does that look like? And actually, there's not a one size fits all for that either, right? Because it depends on the market that you're dealing with. And here we work in 4 different markets. So it could be the smallest kind of thing like that all of a sudden was up for discussion. And it felt quite unnerving, also exciting at the same time, because it opened up more doors. But ultimately it was, also scary in the sense of, oh, all of our historic data means nothing. All the people that used to work in these positions have probably moved on because the churn was so high in every sector, right? Because people are losing their jobs left, right, and centre. So, all of the historical data we've had just all of a sudden just was meaningless. And
Well,
that was a scary point to be at, really.
that's an interesting point that you raised there, because we talk about relationships a lot in the events industry, between suppliers, between sponsors, financial backers, people who make, put up the financial backing through sponsorship that make things like award ceremonies, possible. And those relationships, you might have somebody brand new in the company delivering the event and somebody brand new in the marketing position for the headline sponsor, who suddenly come to the table with completely new ideas. Those relationships, it's not just how we think about producing and delivering the events, it's those relationships that had to sort of start from ground zero again.
Yeah, for sure. And especially some of our smaller suppliers, unfortunately, they just, kind of disappeared. And not only that, the contacts within our core audiences, our target audiences that we want to get to come to these events, they all of a sudden, you're getting bounce backs from people. You have to start doing new data builds because these people have left their roles. These roles have been made redundant. So you're very much starting from blank canvas, and that kind of was very unifying, wasn't it? COVID, it didn't matter how many years experience you had, whether it was 2 or 20. All of a sudden, none of us knew what we were doing anymore.
Yeah.
And so it was, it's quite humbling, a reminder that no one knows everything. But yeah, it's a few years on now, but it still feels like we're still finding and discovering new ways of working that we didn't before.
Absolutely. I found myself sort of not rethinking, but just from nowhere sometimes having a light bulb moment where I'll go, oh, why don't we do it like that? We've always done it like this, but we could do. Why don't we take advantage of that, or do this a little bit differently? And the Friday thing is a really interesting one, because, like you said, particularly something like awards. But if it was a business related awards event, or yeah, very much a conference as well, but it would be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. They were the days that you would aim for, because they're business related. You want them during the working week. Nobody wants to do it on a Monday night. Nobody wants to come on a Friday night because they're sacrificing their Saturday potentially. But for business awards, the type of companies that go to any type of sector awards for a business sector, they want to be there. They want to potentially win. They want to treat it as maybe a team night out if they've bought a table. Everyone wants to get stuck into the wine on the table and, go and get lashed up on the company credit card. We know what happens at these awards. We've all been to them 100,000 times before. Why not do it on a Friday when nobody's really got to think about getting up for work the next day? You've actually got the potential there of allowing your audience to have an even better time because they're not holding back at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the difference is, back in the day, you knew everybody's kind of rough schedule, whereas now, a Friday could be like a Wednesday could be like a Friday to somebody, and there's actually no way of understanding now what people's personal and professional kind of schedules are, or what days they are in London, what days they are not. So,
Mm.
you know, and aside from canvassing every single person in your database, which is just, you know, not I mean, it is possible, but you know, we certainly here can't do that. It's kind of like you have to, there's an element of risk, and you have to kind of take a bit of a punt, and then it's about repositioning what the event means, and trying to lean into this new way of life that everyone has. And ultimately, like, I think, you know, it's something I've always said, that, you know, events are just about people. And I think there is an element of overthinking these things sometimes. You just have to strip it back and think, we are all human beings. These people that are coming to our events, they're just humans like us. What would we want to do? What makes sense for us? I think when you don't have that data, those trends to kind of work from, a lot of the time it just comes down to that. It just comes down to, you know, what are we basing this on? We have nothing to base this on. Okay, we're all just humans. If we're going to a conference and awards, what just feels like it makes sense right now, and see
Sure.
what happens, and then from that start building on it.
Yeah, that old and new balance must have been a difficult one to strike, because whilst we talk about maybe not so much a loss of data, but the data almost becoming irrelevant because it had changed so significantly, you
Yeah.
will still, there are still sort of, you know, essential elements, and let's take an awards as an example. You know, if it's for a business sector, no doubt some of the audience that come to that awards will be retained from pre-pandemic. They will expect a certain sort of pattern, I suppose, to the way that an evening will flow. Was it difficult to sort of strike a balance between retaining older elements but wanting to sort of innovate as well, without maybe alienating, you know, old audience, you know, visitors and attendees?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with awards specifically, the biggest change that we are only now starting to consider making, actually, is this desire for making more of the networking element. So we all know why people go to awards. We all know why people sponsor awards. You know, it's a tried and trusted formula. And here at emap, it still works very well in the sectors that we
Yeah.
work in. So, you know, that is what it is. I think the days of whacking a photo booth in and calling that innovation, you know, is clearly a thing of the past. But I think people are more discerning now, particularly our sponsors, in terms of wanting to make more of the networking, because, you know, they get to network with the people on their table and for a bit in the drinks reception, but that's it. So, you
Yeah.
know, saying that awards is great for networking, I mean, is it? It's great for having a laugh, and it's more about taking your team out on the table that you're sat on. There's more pressure now, I think, to deliver the value. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's about chucking in gimmicks. It's actually just about, okay, do we just give more time to this? Do we schedule, so, you know, do we split up the awards into smaller chunks? We spread out the courses that we're serving further apart, so it's not, you know, 2 hours
Yeah.
of sitting there in silence listening, you know. And as we all know, people start getting rowdy and don't listen by the end anyway. So it's just more about the tweaks to the format rather than these big innovations, because as you say, people will be expecting a certain type of structure, and we don't want to, you know, go too far away from that, for certain events anyway, not all.
Yeah, do you know what, I don't know whether or not you're a mind reader by trade, but that's exactly what I was going to ask you next, was about the formula of an awards. If we look at that again as a specific example, is that we've all been there. You know, you arrive, you have your drinks, you get asked to be sat down for dinner, you have a little opening speech from somebody from the awards, then you get served your lovely meal, you tuck into the wine, and then the lights go down, and at sort of 9:30 the host comes on stage, and you begin the 90-minute or 2-hour slog through the awards and through nomination videos and sponsors, etc. And we've all been there as well, where we get sort of an hour in and nobody's really paying any attention anymore. They're too drunk. Things get rowdy. The impact that you want those categories later on in your script to have, that you're building towards, have less of an impact because of that sort of schedule. And I did one last year where we did exactly what you just described. We broke it up. We did 2 or 3 of the categories literally after people had sat down, straight into it. We did starters, and then we did a couple more categories. We sort of broke it up during the evening so that we could we could allow more of that focus to be retained on the awards rather than asking people to concentrate for 2 hours.
Yeah, and I think small tweaks like that for something like an awards, I think, can work really well. If you straying too far from the classic awards formula, I think you absolutely can, but then you're just turning the model on its head entirely, which can absolutely work. But as we all know, awards can be really profitable when they're done well, and if people are still wanting to pay to come along to them, and they see value in that, you don't want to kind of take that away. So here we're still kind of sticking with that traditional format, but starting to kind of soft launch other awards that are maybe more informal, completely different, funded in a completely different way, and that's what we're kind of looking into exploring for next year as well. But these are kind of new launches rather than relaunches.
Well, let's come back. Let's come back to that in a bit, if we may. But I want to sort of turn the attention or the focus of the conversation to conferences, because again, when we look at how we operated pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, one of the sort of the biggest things to come out of the pandemic was the video meeting. Everyone who hadn't adopted it previously did so almost overnight. And we realized that we could get a lot of content into a short space of time by focusing people's attention. The video meetings meant that people's attention spans were reduced. And I don't know about you, but I think that had a big impact on in-person conferences when they came back, because we suddenly realized we didn't need 60-minute keynote presentations anymore because of people's attention spans. So is that how you guys have felt there in terms of programming content, and you've really changed the sort of the timescales and the structure of the days?
So again, it varies market to market, based on the behaviors of our audiences, right, and kind of what they like. So for example, we find that for our architecture portfolio, the content is best digested when it's kind of punchy, case study led stuff. It's just the way that they work, right? Because of the way that architects' minds work. So that's what they want, and they're the sessions that are consistently rated highly. So we lean into that, and we make sure that we are delivering on that. I think that something that a challenge for us is around the kind of capturing of the digital content, particularly for conferences that are maybe slightly more technical, which is the case with architecture, or in fashion. Our sustainability conference is particularly, topical and probably our most popular in terms of footfall. And we have pressure from delegates wanting to re-listen to the content afterwards, and we don't buy as standard video every single piece of content at every conference that we do, and there are challenges for reasons that we can't do that. We can't, there's not always, it's budgetary constraints.
Absolutely.
So what we've done this year is think, okay, well, we need to be doing this somehow. We need to be capturing this information somehow, because there's still a desire for digital content. So we started doing audio recording and pushing that out via swap card post event, so that everybody that paid for a ticket can access it and listen to it as they need to. And then one development that has led on to is launching a podcast off the back of it. So we're hoping that will then develop and become a revenue stream in its own right once we started building up the audience. So that, it's not groundbreaking stuff, but for Drapers, which is a very well established brand, it's never had a podcast before, it is a big step for us, and it's something brand new for our audience. So it's like, okay, so we've launched this is how we are developing the conference, not just on the day but after the day. So that was quite important for us.
Well, this has been mentioned on this podcast before, is that if we think about what content is now, you and I could be sat on a stage right now at a conference for event professionals talking about this very subject, having this very discussion on a conference stage with 2 microphones and 2 armchairs and a coffee table between us. We can have the same conversation down this video connection that we're doing now. We can record this content. This could either be pushed out live to a digital conference, or we could record it and put it out and call it a podcast. How we actually label things now is a very, very gray area, I think, because, you record a panel discussion at a conference and you put the audio out via Spotify and via Podbean and via Apple Podcasts. What is a podcast? What is a conference discussion? If we're recording it via video, if we're recording it via audio, the content is everywhere now, and there's so much that we can do with it. And again, I think that that's something that during the pandemic we really realized that we were in a better position than maybe we'd given ourselves credit for with some of the content we were creating in terms of how we put it out post event.
Yeah, for sure. It's giving it, a longer shelf life, and knowing, I think we are better placed now to know how to do that. And it's just, like you said, there are endless ways in which you can do that. It's just the actual delivery of it. So for here internally, the question is, aside from, do we have the budget? It's who's actually going to oversee this, who's actually going to deliver it. So something like a podcast, it does need an internal stakeholder to kind of oversee it. And who's the obvious person to do that? Does that sit within events? Does it sit within my division? Does it sit within the editorial team and their digital engagement person? Does it sit with the brand? Does it not? So there's a lot of these kind of conversations to work out as well. And you need to have, if you're going to do something, you've got to do it properly. So you need to make sure that you're able to do that. But then equally, there's that, I'm generally I err on the side of caution. I'm kind of 80% risk averse, and then 20% of me will take the risk when needed. So, I'm not, I'm not one of these kind of like spontaneous entrepreneurial types. I'm a safe pair of hands, but every now and then, if you get me on a good day, I'll just say, we just got to do this and chuck some time and money at this, and let's see what comes out of it. Because if COVID had taught us anything, it's that goodness knows what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to pick up on there. You say, chuck time and money at it, but also use the phrase "do it properly."
Yeah.
But I think one of the other things that we realised during COVID is that we don't need vast budgets to bring in complicated, highly professional production companies to deliver certain elements of content. We've all seen BBC presenters delivering a live report via an iPhone and a set of AirPods in their ears. As long as you're getting the content, you've got visual representation of where they are, you can hear them clearly. I think how we actually deliver content now doesn't necessarily have to be delivered with cutting edge, highly professional broadcast equipment. When we talk about capturing audio for podcasts now, you can get a digital recorder and ask your AV guy to just plug it into his mixing console and take the audio from the microphones that are on a conference stage. And that is good enough for a podcast in most instances. Certainly better than what we would have started podcasts with 15, 16, 17 years ago. So I think as much as you probably want, certainly when you're dealing, with an organization like emap, with the reputation that comes with that brand, you want to do things to a professional level. But I don't know what you think of this as an opinion, but I personally think that we've got a lot more means at our disposal now without the huge budgets that we needed to have 10 years ago.
I agree. And I think there's also a kind of if it suits the brand, there's a certain charm if you are watching something where a speaker or somebody has recorded something on their iPhone. It doesn't look, it's that kind of, it's just another human talking to you. It's not something that's so highly produced. I think for us here, we really have to work with kind of brand guidelines, and everyone is different, and the expectations. The editors are obviously heavily involved in the elements of launching or relaunching an event, and we want their buy-in because it's their event too, right? So that varies wildly as well, from brand to brand. But I think for me, it's less about the tech being done right or costing thousands of pounds. I think for me, when I say doing it properly, I'm talking more about the kind of the workflow and making sure we're all connected. Because as in a large organization like this, okay, somebody organizes that the audio is captured, then it's sent to someone else to kind of do the editing, and then it's sent to someone else to host, and then it's sent to someone else who manages all of the analytics, and then that has to feed into certain reports. And it's more about kind of getting it done properly. For me, it means making sure that marketing understand what's required, that the editorial team are fully on board and want to support it through what they're pushing out, that the event ops team understand the logistics of it and why it's important and build it into the budget. So it's that, making it seamless, because with this Draper's podcast, for example, the only way it's going to work and that we're going to drive engagement and then hopefully it become a revenue stream is if we've got processes in place that can work. And I'm all about the process.
No, absolutely. There has to be a clear maybe hierarchy is the wrong word, but like you said, a process, because again, an organization like yours that's dealing with hundreds of clients, I would imagine, once you've got a process in place for one event, that can potentially be replicated across other events. So having that clear process in place is probably critical when you're dealing with many different the same event, a conference, for example, but in different sectors who might want to achieve the same sort of outcome. So I can imagine those processes are in place. We've got around about sort of 5 minutes left on today's episode, and we're flying through time. But one thing I wanted to get around to asking you is venues. And whether or not there's been any sort of significant change or reevaluation of what is a good venue or an appropriate venue for any given event. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to ask that is because of the sort of the shift from very, very formal, being used to go to some of these sort of formal business events. Then during the pandemic, things got a lot more relaxed because we were doing things over video. People weren't putting on the suits and the ties or a jacket and a shirt anymore. And then when we came back, there has been, dare I say, a slightly sort of more casual approach to some of these. And I'm wondering whether or not that's impacted at all in terms of venue selection, in terms of how you analyze, what might be good for any given event.
So the venue search is an interesting one, constant battle. So we have a head of ops here, Sophie, who oversees the venues and the supplier side, and we work together on that stuff, but she very much drives it. And I think the biggest shift that we are seeing at the moment is the requirement, both from us and from the brand teams, around finding venues that are sustainable. Perhaps they've been retrofitted, not new builds. So trying to essentially lean into some of the practices that we're preaching via the various brands. So for example, Draper Sustainable Fashion, you need to host it at a venue that has sustainable practices that can be proved. If it's an architecture retrofit, we've got a retrofit conference, so we need to host it in a venue that's been is a retrofit, it's so immediately you start these criteria start coming, there's more and more. And as I'm sure everyone listening will know, the venue costs are skyrocketed, kind of understandably, because they need to start recouping what they've lost, right? So
and energy prices, you've got all these factors in place,
everything. And you have to mitigate that, the obvious ways. Ticket prices, our ticket prices need to start going up, and we need to try and mitigate that to a degree. But I think for us, the biggest challenge is pushing back on the venue, saying, okay, what are your sustainable credentials? And also accessibility. Some people might have seen the emap Ramp It Up campaign that we've launched, where we're pushing every venue to provide ramps free of charge to organizers. So the organizers shouldn't have to be paying more for that. It should just be people with accessibility needs should be able to expect they'll be catered for regardless. So it's that kind of those kind of nuances in terms of kind of informal venues versus formal. That for us hasn't really changed. I would say that we do, where possible, try and work with kind of partners or within the relevant industries to kind of co-host events. That's quite nice for the core audience, because then they're in a space, so that in an architecture practice, for example, that works for smaller events, obviously not the big ones.
Have you it's not necessarily a final question because we've still got a few minutes, but again, the practice of having a conference and then immediately tying on an awards event beyond that conference, which is commonplace in the industry, has that changed at all? Have you found that you've actually split some of them up, or where there was a conference and an awards that were tied in together, has that remained the same?
It's interesting. So we split them, and now they're coming back together.
Wow.
And that is kind of two reasons, really. One, we have found that there's actually, so say you have, I don't know, take sustainable fashion, the people that attend the conference and the people that go to the awards, there's actually not a huge amount of crossover. It's really interesting. You've got different people going to different things. So from our perspective, merging them doesn't cannibalize anything, and it's not added pressure on the time of the individuals, because it's different people going. And the same trend seems to apply across all of our markets. And there's an obvious benefit to us as an organization of putting everything on the same day. So we're starting to bring them back in. And then on the second kind of reason for that is we have launched a conference in a space where we have an awards and there was no conference. So, when we launched it on a different day. We didn't want to tie it in to that timing, wanted it to work as a standalone. It's successful. So now we're bringing it in with the awards, if that makes sense. So
within physically the same space that the awards would be in the evening. So utilising the same sort of staging,
on one occasion, yes. On another occasion, actually, no. There'll be two different venues, but on the same day. So it's more for us a resource, for us it helps with resource planning. If everything's focused on one day, it helps with kind of noise in the market. Everything's much more focused. We just come up with more sophisticated kind of ticketing style. So, okay, if people want to come to both, what kind of deal can we offer them, etc. And actually, stage set sharing saves a bit of cost, but it doesn't, not a huge amount. So that's less of a consideration.
And I guess the sustainability element does creep back in, because if there is any crossover in the audiences and they are going to both, then from a travel point of view, etc., you've got that sort of sustainability element that will fall into probably a small percentage of the audience.
Yeah, for sure. For next year, there's a project going on with the management team about measuring the carbon footprint of all of our events, which we feel like we're actually behind the curve on this. So once we start measuring, it's going to become even more evident where we need to start offsetting that, and things like that are going to help. And then when we are confident that we are doing the right things and we're making headway, we can feed that back to the market, because it's important to them as well. Fashion, architecture, our other brands that we work on, materials recycling. Obviously, sustainability is just inherent now, right? So we need to start working harder.
Yeah, and that's a very, very sort of apropos to wrapping up today's podcast, and maybe mentioning, as I'm doing on most of the episodes now, and giving a blatant plug for Event Sustainability Live, new event that was launched a couple of months ago by Event Industry News. It's going to run alongside Event Tech Live at Excel in London in November. So have a little Google of Event Sustainability Live. We're bringing a dedicated event specifically for event professionals to discuss everything sustainability and sustainable practices, not just in terms of looking at carbon footprints and recycled coffee cups and all of that jazz, but sustainability is something that as an industry falls right down to our human resources, our HR practices, how we look after our staff, the well-being of people working within the industry. All of that has an impact on sustainability and running sustainable events, and that's sort of a good way to begin wrapping up today's episode by giving a mention for Event Sustainability Live in November alongside Event Tech Live at Excel London. Caroline Cronin, head of events at emap, has been our guest today, talking about precedents, trends, how things have changed since the pandemic, and how we've had this lovely sort of refreshed way of thinking for the last 2.5 or so years. It seems a lifetime ago now. I have to confess it, that the conversations and all of these sort of cliches that sort of crept in and were still being used about a year ago about people love getting back to in person. I think that is almost a lifetime ago now. We've been back for some time now, but it's really interesting to look at how, since we've been back, our practices and our approach to things have changed. So Caroline, huge thanks for taking a bit of time out today to have a chat with us on the podcast. What we should do is come back to you before we wrap up and just say, if anybody wants to find out a little bit more about the events that you're running, about some of the ramp it up thing, how do we find out about that? How can our guests do their own research?
Well, if you want to follow emap on LinkedIn, that's the best place to find out any kind of updates around the things like our Ramp It Up campaign. And then the only other little plug I wanted to make, because, emap doesn't need to be plugged. We all know who emap is. I am a trustee for Eventwell, which is the mental health organization for event professionals. And so I would like to plug that. If you're interested in finding out what Eventwell do, you can follow them on Twitter or LinkedIn at Eventwell UK.
and have a little search as well in some of our older episodes. All of the episodes of the podcast are available wherever you get your podcasts from, or via Event Industry News. And Eventwell and the people sort of behind Eventwell and Helen have been guests on the podcast before. So if you want to find out a little bit more about them, not only Google them and have a little look at their own sort of pages, but you can also find, I think, probably 2 or maybe even 3 previous episodes of this podcast where we've spoken to Eventwell and found out what they've been doing within the industry. So yeah, great plug, Caroline. Thanks for
that was seamless.
Thanks for mentioning that. It's almost like we know what we're doing when it comes to producing things. I should mention before we finish finally today that if you are listening to today's podcast via your podcast platform, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com, where you can find video versions of all of our podcasts, as well as all the latest news, features and special supplements that are on the Event Industry News website. And you can also check out the A to Z supplier directory. If you work within the events industry and you're looking for a product or a service as a supplier, chances are you'll find it within the A to Z supplier directory on eventindustrynews.com. If you are already on the website and watching us today, thanks very much for joining us. And don't forget that you can get audio versions in the opposite direction of all of our podcasts. Just go to wherever you get your podcasts from on your device, search for Event Industry News, and you will find us on places like Spotify and Apple Podcasts, etc., etc. Thanks very much for tuning in, everybody. Thanks again to Caroline Cronin for being our wonderful guest today, and we'll see you on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye, everybody.